Most men who lose money to a woman lose it to one person. One smile, one story, one set of needs. Silas Thornton lost £505,000 to an operation. Every member of Talia Mercado's family had a role, a script, a timing. He thought he was building a life with someone. He was the project. And by the time he understood what had been done to him, he had to reckon with something far more disturbing than betrayal by one woman. He had been betrayed by a room full of people who passed the food and laughed at his jokes and remembered his birthday. Every single one of them knew. The detail that broke something in me, not the money, not even Talia, but the detail that made the whole thing feel like something I could not put back together, was the birthday card. It arrived in my apartment in Quezon City, 2 days before my 74th birthday. A proper card, handmade looking, with a drawing of something I couldn't fully identify, some kind of bird, done in colored pencil, signed by 9 members of Talia's family, her mother Cora, her brother Efren, her younger sister Phoebe, her cousins Dante and Myra, 4 others I had met at various points over the previous 18 months, and whose names I had learned carefully because I understood they mattered to Talia, and therefore wanted them to matter to me. 9 signatures. 9 people who had, according to the NBI report I received 14 months later, participated in a structured plan to extract as much money as possible from me in a defined period of time. They had roles. There was a document, a WhatsApp group conversation that formed part of the evidence, that assigned who would ask for what and when, who would befriend me most directly, how to sequence the requests to avoid triggering suspicion, and what the exit plan looked like when the operation wound down. They called the group something in Tagalog that the investigator translated for me as, roughly, the arrangement. 9 people signed my birthday card, and every one of them knew about the arrangement. I need to go back, because understanding what happened requires understanding what I was before it happened, and what I was doing in the Philippines in the first place. My name is Silas Thornton. I spent 40 years in corporate real estate development, the last 17 as a senior executive at a London-based property group that I will not name because it is still operating and employs people I respect. I was good at my work in the particular way that someone becomes good at something when it has consumed most of their adult life. I understood markets. I understood negotiation. I understood the psychology of large transactions, the way people behave when significant money is in play, the tells that indicate someone is more or less motivated than they are presenting, the difference between a position and a posture. I retired at 72. My wife Isabel had died 4 years before that, a long illness, Parkinson's, which I managed alongside my work for the last 6 years of her life, and which had taught me things about endurance and about what matters that I could not have learned any other way. We had 2 sons, Marcus, 46, who works in private equity in the city, and Nicholas, 43, who teaches at a university in Edinburgh. They are both good men. They are different from each other, and both were formed in some part by watching their father manage a career and a dying wife simultaneously, which is not an education I would have chosen for them. After Isabel, after retirement, I had a quality of life that looked comfortable from outside and felt cavernous from inside. The London flat, Kensington, bought in 1991, paid for 3 times over by now, was large and silent. My social life consisted of former colleagues and a handful of long friendships that the years had thinned to monthly lunches and intermittent messages. Marcus called regularly. Nicholas called less often but more warmly when he did. I was not in crisis. I was in the particular state of a man whose structure has been removed and who has not yet found what replaces it. I went to the Philippines the first time on the strength of an article I read in a travel supplement. Not, I want to say, a romance tourism article, a piece about retirement destinations, the quality of life available on a UK pension, the climate, the healthcare system, the English language environment. It was practical, and it read as such. And I booked a flight to Manila at 73, the way I had made most of the practical decisions in my career, having assessed the information available and decided the risk-reward was acceptable. I liked Manila more than I expected. Not immediately. It overwhelmed me for the first 3 days. But as I spent time in Quezon City, which a contact from a UK expat community had recommended as more manageable than the central business districts, I found a rhythm that suited me. I took an apartment for a month, extended to 6 weeks, and found that my days had a texture I had lost somewhere in retirement. I met Talia Mercado at a community health fair in a local barangay, a neighborhood initiative she had helped organize through the management role she held at a local community development office. She was 43 years old and ran the logistics and volunteer coordination for the event with a quiet efficiency that I noticed immediately. I was there because a Filipino acquaintance from my building had invited me along and said it would be a good way to see the neighborhood. Talia was not the most obvious person in the room. She did not seek attention. She had the manner of someone who is focused on the work rather than on being noticed doing the work, which is a distinction I had spent 40 years learning to identify in professional contexts, and which I found, in a personal context, immediately attractive. We spoke briefly at the end of the event. I mentioned that I was an expat, retired, staying in the neighborhood. She mentioned the community development work she managed. We exchanged numbers on the basis of her offering to connect me with resources for long-term residents, local markets, medical facilities, the practical geography of living in Quezon City rather than visiting it. She followed up. That matters. She was the one who sent a message the following day with a list of recommendations, specific, useful, carefully compiled, not flirtatious, not warm in an immediately personal way, just professional and neighborly. It was 3 months before anything personal developed. 3 months of messages and occasional coffees, and one lunch where we talked for 2 hours about urban community development and the particular challenges of Manila's informal settlement areas, and how policy and street-level reality diverge. She was intelligent and engaged, and had opinions she defended with evidence rather than emotion. I found it, as I had found the professional competence at the health fair, compelling. When the relationship became explicitly personal, when she arrived at my apartment one evening for dinner, that we both understood was different from the lunches, I was clear with myself about what I was doing. I was 73 and she was 43. I knew what that looked like from outside. I had taken a full accounting of my own motivations: loneliness, admiration, physical attraction, and the particular relief of being in the presence of someone who engaged with me as a whole person rather than as a retired elderly widower to be managed. All of those were real. All of them were declared to myself honestly. What I did not account for was that someone else had also taken a full accounting of my situation. Someone had looked at me, at what I was, what I had, what I needed, and seen not a person but a resource with a defined shelf life. I met the family over my 3rd and 4th months in Quezon City. Not all at once, gradually, in the way that makes sense when a relationship deepens. A dinner with her mother Cora, then a Sunday gathering where Efren and his wife were there, then a family event where the extended circle appeared. I learned names. I made the effort to remember them correctly, to connect names to faces, to ask appropriate follow-up questions about the things people had told me. Cora was in her mid-70s. She had a stillness about her that reminded me slightly of Isabel, and I responded to that in ways I may not have fully registered at the time. She treated me with a warmth that felt genuine and grandmotherly, and which I accepted because I wanted it to be genuine and grandmotherly. Efren was 48, the elder brother, practical and watchful. He worked in a transport business and had the air of someone who was always quietly calculating. I had a professional respect for that manner. I had spent 40 years in rooms with people who calculated, and I interpreted it as the protective wariness of an older brother, rather than as what the NBI report later described as the operation coordinator. Phoebe was 38, Talia's younger sister, warm and funny in a way that made social occasions feel easy. She became, over the course of my first year in the Philippines, something close to what I thought was a genuine friend. She asked me questions about London, about the property business, about Marcus and Nicholas. She remembered what I told her. She sent messages on significant dates. The cousins, Dante and Myra, were present at larger gatherings and occupied what I understood as peripheral roles: friendly, available, interested in me without being intense about it. Dante once spent an afternoon helping me navigate a bureaucratic registration process for long-term residents that would have taken me twice as long alone. I was genuinely grateful. This is what I need you to understand about the construction of what was done to me. None of these people were cold. None of them were obviously performing. The warmth that I experienced across 18 months of engagement with this family was warm in ways that felt authentic, that had the specific textures and imperfections of authentic warmth rather than the smooth surface of something manufactured. That was the skill of it. The warmth was real enough to function. It was calibrated. The WhatsApp messages revealed a level of coordination about how each person managed their relationship with me, but calibration is not the same as fabrication. Some of what they gave me was genuine. I believe that. I have to believe that, because the alternative, that every moment of 18 months was pure performance, requires a level of sustained acting that seems, even now, implausible. What was not genuine was the purpose behind it. The financial requests began at 4 months, and were organized with a discipline I can only describe as professional, because I spent 40 years in professional environments, and I recognize structured escalation when I see it, even in retrospect. Cora's health. The first request came through Talia, carefully, with visible distress, framed as something she had tried to manage without involving me and couldn't. Cora needed a cardiac procedure. The public hospital had a long waiting list. A private facility could do it within a month. The cost was substantial, but not outrageous. Approximately £8,000. I paid it. I paid it because a woman I cared about was frightened for her mother, and because £8,000 was not an amount that caused me difficulty. Cora recovered. There was a small celebration at the family home to which I was invited, and at which I was treated with a warmth that I am now required to understand differently than I experienced it. At the time, it felt like being part of something. A family that had let me in. Efren's transport business. The second request came from Talia on Efren's behalf, 3 weeks after Cora's recovery. A vehicle financing problem. The bank had called in part of a loan and he needed bridging funds. Talia brought it to me reluctantly, she said. She had told Efren she wouldn't ask, but he had no one else. The amount was £14,000. I paid it. Phoebe's situation came at 6 months. She had been accepted into a graduate program and needed fees paid within a deadline window. £12,000. Talia asked me directly this time, with less of the distress performance of the earlier requests. More simply, as if we had moved past the stage where she needed to dress these things up. I paid it. The pattern that I was not seeing was not visible from inside the relationship. Each request had a specific person attached, a specific reason, a defined amount. Each was separated from the others by enough time that they did not feel like a sequence. Each was framed within the context of a warm, ongoing relationship with someone I cared about. What I learned later, from the NBI report and from what my London solicitor's forensic review established, was that the requests had been sequenced from a plan. The timing between requests had been calibrated to prevent the accumulation from becoming visible. The amounts had been set at levels designed to remain below what I might question. Not so large that I would hesitate, not so small that they were not worth the effort. The people making the requests had been assigned based on their relationship warmth with me. Talia for the most significant asks, Cora and Phoebe for the secondary ones, Efren for the business-framed requests that he understood I would process differently from the personal ones. Dante and Myra had roles too. Dante's bureaucratic helpfulness established goodwill credit. Myra's friendly presence at gatherings maintained the texture of the family as a community rather than a series of individuals. There was a term in the WhatsApp messages, in the investigator's translation, for what they were doing with the social texture, maintaining what the investigator rendered as the atmosphere, making sure the atmosphere around me felt warm, so that each request arrived into warmth rather than suspicion. The total across 18 months was £505,000. I am aware of how that number looks. I was a 74-year-old retired executive who had lived 40 years in high-value property transactions, and I did not see that the people around me were running one. That awareness of how it looks has been one of the harder things to live with. Not the loss, the visibility of my own failure to see, The first disruption to the atmosphere came in month 17. Nicholas called me from Edinburgh. He had been researching retirement visa procedures for the Philippines. He had told me he was thinking of visiting for an extended period, which I was pleased about, and in the course of that research he had connected with an expat forum where he had read accounts of structured family operations targeting foreign retirees. He called me with a carefulness that I recognized as the tone he uses when he is about to say something he believes I will resist. "Dad," he said, "I want to ask you some questions about Talia's family, and I want you to listen before you tell me everything is fine." I told him everything was fine. He asked his questions anyway. He asked about the cumulative financial support I had provided. He had a partial picture. I had mentioned some of the requests over our calls, individually, each one in the context of the warmth that surrounded it. When he laid them out sequentially, as he had compiled them from what I had told him, the total he arrived at, which was not the full total, because there were amounts I had not mentioned, was already enough to alarm him. "Dad," he said, "that's over £300,000 that you can account for, in 18 months, across a family of 10 people, I said, "spread over a year and a half. That's still £300,000, he said. I was defensive. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I told him he didn't understand the context, that the relationships were real, that the needs had been genuine. I used the Cora cardiac procedure as my anchor. I had been there. I had seen the surgery. I had seen the recovery. That was real." "Yes," Nicholas said. "The surgery was probably real. The question is whether that was the whole story, or the beginning of one." I told him I would think about what he'd said. I ended the call. I sat with his words for 3 days without doing anything with them, which is a form of knowing without acting that I am now very familiar with. What shifted me was not Nicholas. It was something smaller. I noticed, at the beginning of month 18, that Talia's responses to my messages had become slightly delayed. Not dramatically, she was still present, still warm when present, but the response time had lengthened in a way that felt different. I am a man who has spent 40 years reading the metrics of engagement, and I noticed the shift the way you notice a change in wind direction, not consciously at first, then with increasing clarity. I also noticed that no requests had come in 6 weeks. After a pattern of requests spaced 3 to 5 weeks apart for over a year, 6 weeks of nothing. The atmosphere was still there, but the engine driving it had paused. I called Marcus. He had been less involved in my Philippines situation than Nicholas. Marcus processes things through action rather than analysis, and action in this situation was not available to him from London. But I called him and told him what Nicholas had said and what I was noticing. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, do you want me to have someone look at this?" "What do you mean?" I said. "I know a firm that does due diligence on individuals. Background, financial patterns, that kind of thing. It's what I do all day. I can have someone run a check on this family." I said yes. I said it before I had fully decided, because something in me had been waiting for someone to offer me a way to look, without being the one who initiated the looking. The due diligence firm Marcus engaged, a London-based outfit that worked with a Manila partner for the Philippines portion, produced a report within 3 weeks. It was not the full picture that the NBI investigation would later produce, but it was enough. Efren had a pattern of involvement in financial disputes with foreign nationals, 2 civil cases, both settled quietly, both involving alleged misrepresentation. Talia's management role at the Community Development Office had ended 8 months earlier, a fact she had not mentioned to me. The address listed for Cora's home on various documents did not match the address I had visited. Several of the family members, when traced, had connections to other foreign nationals that a Manila-based investigator identified as following a consistent pattern of phased financial requests. Marcus called me when the report arrived. He read me the key points in the particular controlled tone he uses when he is trying not to show the extent of his feeling. "Dad," he said, when he had finished, "I need you to hear what this means." "I'm hearing it," I said. "All of it? The part about Efren, and the part about Talia's job, and the part about the address?" "Yes," I said. "Then you understand that this was organized. I'm starting to, I said. I went to Talia that evening. I had the report. I did not bring it. I left it at the apartment, because I had spent enough time in negotiation to know that arriving with documents puts people on the defensive before the conversation has a chance to be anything useful. I wanted to give her the space to be honest, which in retrospect was a generosity she had not extended to me at any point across 18 months, but which I could not help offering, because it is how I have always conducted difficult conversations. We sat at the table where we had eaten dozens of meals. The apartment was familiar. The evening light through the window was familiar. She looked at me with the expression she had that I had always read as attentiveness, that particular quality of focus that had drawn me to her at the health fair. And I understood, in that moment, that I had always been the subject of that attention rather than its recipient. That the focus had been directed at me as an object of study, rather than as a person she was simply present with. I've had some information come to me, I said, about your family, about the pattern of what's happened over the past 18 months. She held very still. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me anything you want to tell me, I said, before I do anything with what I know. She looked at the table. A long pause. When she looked up, her expression was not the one I expected. Not defensive, not frightened. It was tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been maintaining a sustained effort and has reached the point where maintaining it costs more than stopping. How much do you know? She said. Enough, I said. Another pause. My family needed. We had genuine needs, Silas. Not all of it was. Talia, I said. She stopped. The question I need answered, I said, is whether any of what was between us, you and me, not your family, was real. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, some of it was. Which part? She shook her head slightly. Not in refusal. In what looked like genuine difficulty. The beginning, she said. At the beginning, it wasn't, I didn't know how far it would go. But you knew about the plan. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked at the table. I told her I was going to report what I knew to the NBI. I told her this without anger, as a statement of fact. She nodded. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her to be honest with the investigators. I do not know whether she was. The NBI investigation was extensive and produced the report that I referenced at the beginning of this account. The WhatsApp group, the assigned roles, the translated name for what they had called the arrangement. Efren was identified as the coordinator. Talia was identified as the primary relationship holder. Cora, Phoebe, Dante, and Myra each had documented roles. 3 others in the family circle were peripherally involved. Legal proceedings were initiated. The Philippine justice system moves at its own pace. My UK solicitor, a woman named Rebecca Crane, who had handled international fraud matters before, managed the coordination between UK legal remedies and the Philippine proceedings. She was precise about what the realistic outcomes were and did not encourage false expectations. The £505,000 was moved through a series of accounts and is substantially dispersed, she told me. Criminal proceedings may result in convictions. Financial recovery is a separate and more difficult question. I asked her directly what I should expect to recover. A portion, she said. Possibly. In years rather than months. I have been back in London for 10 months. The Kensington flat. Marcus lives 20 minutes away and calls more than he used to. Nicholas came down for a weekend in the autumn, and we had the kind of long dinner that requires 2 bottles of wine and ends with both of us saying things that have been waiting to be said for years. About Isabel, about what it cost me to manage her illness and my career simultaneously, about what the Philippines had represented for me and what I had been trying to find there. You weren't stupid, Dad, Nicholas said. I was insufficiently careful, I said, in ways I would never have permitted in a professional context. That's because it wasn't professional, he said. It was personal. And you've always been better at the professional. He was right. It is a specific limitation that I am no longer inclined to defend or minimize. I built a 40-year career on reading the behavior of people in transactions, and I applied none of that reading to a transaction I was inside. Personal feeling is not a substitute for due diligence. Warmth experienced is not evidence of warmth offered authentically. A birthday card signed by 9 people is not proof that those 9 people have your interests at heart. I think about the birthday card sometimes. The colored pencil bird. 9 signatures. The investigator told me that the birthday card had been suggested in the WhatsApp group as a warmth maintenance tactic for the weeks before my birthday, during which no financial requests were planned. It was scheduled. Its purpose was to sustain the atmosphere so that the next request, which came 3 weeks after my birthday, from Phoebe, for graduate program fees, would arrive into goodwill rather than caution. I received a handmade birthday card from 9 people who were managing me. I sat with it on my kitchen table and felt grateful. That is the thing that stays with me. Not the £505,000. Not the legal proceedings. Not the NBI report with its clinical documentation of roles and timing. The birthday card on the kitchen table. The feeling of gratitude. The fact that I felt it completely, and that it was exactly what they needed me to feel. I have told this story to Rebecca, and to Marcus, and to Nicholas, and to my oldest friend in London, a man named Thomas Holt, who has known me for 50 years and who listened to all of it without saying a single unnecessary word. When I finished, Thomas said, "You were lonely, Silas. And loneliness makes a person permeable. That's not stupidity. That's being human." I think Thomas is right, but I also think that being human is not a sufficient protection against what was done to me, and that the lesson I have to take from this is not simply to trust myself more. The lesson is to trust the right people more. The Nicholas who called with uncomfortable questions, the Marcus who offered to have someone look, and to trust the warmth of large groups of strangers significantly less, regardless of how genuine the warmth feels in the moment. A family that knows your birthday is not a family that loves you. A community development manager who helps you find local markets is not automatically a person whose motives are what they appear to be. A cardiac procedure witnessed is not evidence that the cardiac procedure was the whole story. I know these things now. I did not know them, not in their application to my own life, until £505,000 and 18 months taught me them at full cost. I am 75 years old. I am in the Kensington flat that is paid for and will remain mine. I have 2 sons who call more than they used to, and who I have let see me fail at something significant, which is, I have found, a better basis for relationship than letting them see only the version of me that succeeds. Isabel would have seen it coming. She had a quality of perception about people that I never fully developed. She compensated for my analytical strength with an intuitive one, and for 31 years together those 2 things covered each other's blind spots. After she died, I had only my own sight, and I was too confident in it. That confidence cost me £505,000 and a birthday card from 9 people who knew exactly what they were doing. The colored pencil bird. I never did work out what species it was supposed to be. It doesn't matter. It was never really for me.